Okay, so now we have Mille Bojer. Mille Bojer contributed to funding the Reos partners offices in both Johannesburg and Sao Paulo, and is now based in Geneva. She is co-author of Mapping Dialogue: Essential Tools for Social Change. Mille has worked on large-scale multi-stakeholder projects addressing challenges including HIV, AIDS, children, education, democracy, civil society, ocean management, health, and sustainable development. She has worked at community, national, regional, and global levels. Previously, at Pioneers of Change, she developed expertise in facilitating learning communities, hosting dialogue, and building networks and organizations. So now we have with us Mille Bojer.
Thank you. I don't know if it's possible to turn the camera at all so I can see the group because I'm just seeing a speaker. Hi, everyone. It's really good to be with you online. I'm sorry I couldn't join you. I was, until a few days ago, hoping to travel to Bilbao, but I had to cancel because of the COVID situation. So really sorry not to be with you. I've never been to Bilbao. So I think I would have already felt like I was parachuting in, and now I feel even more like I'm parachuting in from far away. So I hope that that I'll be able to share some thoughts with you that are useful. And I also hope that this is just the beginning of a conversation, and that we'll be able to continue learning with each other. I've heard of Mondragon for many years, and it's been coming up a lot this year. So I'm very interested in different ways of organizing ourselves, and so that was also why I was very, very keen to come. But hopefully, it will be another time. So I'm going to share a few slides with you. First of all, just to say a few words about Reos partners, so you understand where I'm coming from. So we're a global social enterprise and a global team on 5 different continents. And the focus of our work is on supporting multi-stakeholder collaboration in situations of great complexity, uncertainty, discomfort, and often polarization. So we really help very diverse groups of stakeholders to collaborate together and to move forward together in challenging circumstances. We work on many different topics. These are just a few of them. For example, inclusive insurance in Mongolia, inequality and illegality in Mexico, sustainable fashion in Brazil, climate adaptation in Namibia. We work around the world on different topics, and the reason why we can work on so many different topics is because what we bring is really the process expertise, so the understanding of collaboration and what enables people to work together in these kinds of circumstances. Our approach is always systemic, first of all. So we help people to see the situation from a holistic and interconnected perspective and to identify leverage points for change. A systemic perspective doesn't mean that everyone is doing everything, but it means that people are working on different leverage points with a perspective of the whole. So I think this relates a bit to the local and global that we've been talking about. How can you work within your sphere of influence, but with an awareness of bigger trends and an awareness of the consequences of your actions and the impacts that may be far apart in space and time. Secondly, we always work with a collaborative approach, so bringing, as I said, diverse stakeholders together to work effectively together by embracing conflict and connection. And finally, we take an experimental approach. So we work with very creative methods and really sort of developing and testing and implementing a portfolio of new responses to the challenge that people are dealing with. So this is my work. Really, I've been doing this for about 20 years. I'm much more of a facilitator than I am a lecturer. I think this is giving a presentation like this where I'm talking without listening to you is not my preferred mode of interacting. So I hope we'll be able to interact more, but really my work is around facilitating change, applying this kind of approach. Okay, so One of the methods that we work with often is called the transformative scenarios process. I know you've already worked some with scenarios, so I'm not going to explain what scenarios are. But I know that this is about the future and so on. And so to mention that we've been working with these transformative scenarios processes for several decades. And the key thing about the transformative scenarios process is that partly many scenario processes are about adapting to the understanding our context and our future context so that we can adapt to it. Whereas the transformative scenarios process is about understanding possible futures so that we can influence them and so that we can transform our reality. And the other key differentiator of the transformative scenarios process is that we work with stakeholders. Many scenarios are developed by experts in think tanks or universities. And I love this idea of the university with a C, that it's about bringing stakeholders and the university together, because our work is very much about working with the stakeholders to develop their own narratives about the future. And of course, linking that with the kind of knowledge that universities and think tanks can offer as well. So the question that I was asked to speak to was, what future do we want? And I've been staring at this title of my talk, because this is actually not a question that I ask very often in this form. And I think it's a question that's asked probably every hour of every day somewhere around the world in a workshop. People are asking this question, but still we have lots of problems. And I think this question sometimes can also be problematic and have unintended consequences in itself. And in staring at this question in the last few days, I've been thinking about 3 traps that are in this question. And so I want to share those 3 traps with you, and hopefully in doing that, connect to some of the capabilities that are required for transforming our reality and for futures work, and helping to share, some alternative approaches to this. So the first trap in this question is this word want. What future do we want? And that relates to some of what Igor was just talking about now. There's a difference between what we want and actually connecting to our agency and our will. And I think Otto Scharmer may speak to this later today as well. I've known him for many years. He speaks about the importance of will. He also speaks about the future that wants to emerge, which is also not about our desires, but about the potential, and connecting that to our own will and our own agency. So this idea of what we want risks being in some ways a bit passive or even entitled, or somehow something that the world needs to deliver to us. Whereas connecting to our own potential and how we can contribute is a different kind of energy. So that's one thing about this word, about want. And the other piece about this is that want is about our desires. And when we're working with the future and with social transformation, it's really important to understand the difference between, in relation to our desires, the difference between fantasy and imagination. So fantasy is when we're projecting our desires or even our fears onto the world. And it's something that comes from the inside out. It's like my hopes, my desires, my fears, and I'm projecting them onto the world and creating expectations of the world based on my fantasy. Imagination is something very different than that. And I think we need to learn a lot more about imagination. We have a huge need for imagination right now. And it gets confused with fantasy, and we just don't have enough capabilities around imagination. So imagination is not about projecting our own ideas onto the world and making things up in our head. It's about interacting with the world and seeing the world and its potential in a new way. So it's very much in connection with reality. One of my favorite stories of imagination is about this guy here. His name is Trevor Mulaudzi in South Africa. I used to live in South Africa for many years. And I work with an organization called Ashoka, which supports social entrepreneurs. And that's how I met Trevor. He's one of the Ashoka Fellows. And this guy basically was one of the first high-level geologists in South Africa, had a very good job in a mining company, very well paid, very well established. And one day he was walking along the street in a community, and he saw the kids outside on the street during school hours. And so he asked them what they were doing in the street and why they weren't in school. And they said they needed to go to the bathroom. And he said, why don't you go to the bathroom in school? They said the bathrooms in the school were so filthy that they couldn't use them. And so he went with them into the school and took a look at the bathrooms. And in the moment that he was in there, he could see how those filthy bathrooms were undermining the education of a generation, which relates to violence in the country, economic development in the country. He just saw that leverage point of whether toilets were clean or dirty, and how many consequences that was having in society. And because he was passionate about education, he quit his job and he immediately started cleaning the toilets and built an organization that was about hygiene in schools, and that's become very big and successful in South Africa. And I think many people would have run away from that toilet. Many people would not have gone in there. They would have shrugged their shoulders. If they had gone in there, they would have run away. They would not have started cleaning. But because his imagination, he could imagine the toilet in a different state, and he connected to his will to do something about it. And he could see how that was influencing so many other things. So I think we need a lot more of that kind of imagination. And the great thing about working in a city is that you are in the space that you're also talking about transforming. And so what does it mean for you to walk around Bilbao and look at it not just as it is, but as it can be, by interacting with that reality? Just one more thing about imagination is that it's helpful to think about 3 different kinds of imagination. So descriptive imagination is when you can look at something and see it through a new lens, see it in a new way, but you're still accepting the thing as it is, but applying a different lens. Challenging imagination is the capacity for us to imagine things not being as they are. For me, for example, to imagine myself not eating meat, without meat in my life. That's a challenging imagination. If in a climate perspective, it's a very important, challenging imagination to have right now. And the creative imagination is the imagination of what can we build, what can we create. So this is, I think, part of one of the traps of this question. That these issues are around the question of want and understanding how to approach that in a different way. The second trap in this question is about the word future. And I rarely talk about future in the singular. Because I work with scenarios, I often think about futures. And it's really important to think about the future not as one trajectory or as one thing, but as a landscape. And in our work in Reos, we use this approach called the futures cone, which really sees how the future is a landscape. In the middle of the futures cone is the projected future. This is the future that we're already co-creating. So there is a future we're already co-creating. We can co-create a different future if we want, if we will so. But the projected future is the kind of continuation of current trends. And that's where a lot of universities spend a lot of their time sort of predicting what will happen. And I think often academics get a bit trapped in thinking that the projected future is the only thing possible. Outside of the projected future, there's a probable future, which is likely to happen, not necessarily in a straight line from today. And then there's the plausible future, which is, with our current knowledge, what could happen, what's believable, what do we think is what is a credible future reality. But even beyond what most people believe to be possible in the future, there's something more that's possible than that we will only know in the future. was actually possible. We think it's not possible today, but it will be possible. It will turn out to be possible. I think the many of the things that happened with COVID are in this domain. And then there's the domain of the preposterous and actually the impossible. The domain of the preferable cuts across all of these. So that's the blue ball here. Part of some of the projected futures is what we desire. Some of the probable or plausible future is what we desire, and some of the impossible is what we desire. And we need to understand which part of our desires is impossible, but to use our imagination to press against the boundaries of that. So understand which part of our preference is in the domain of fantasy, because it's really impossible, but at the same time push the boundaries and engage in discussion with each other about, I don't believe something's going to happen, but you do believe it could happen. And so could we work towards that? Could we push the boundaries of what's possible? And when we work with multiple futures in Reos, we're really looking at what's at the edges of possibility and telling different stories around those edges, not at what's most likely to happen. And so the question that we ask ourselves is, what stories need to be told? If we think about that future landscape, what multiple stories at the edge of possibility do we need to tell ourselves and each other so that that will inspire, that will expand imagination and inspire action towards a different reality? And the third trap is this question of we. And I think it depends. We think about we without often clarifying who is the we. And often we think that reality looks like this, where there's kind of a collective with some parts in it, and we're all going to set aside some of our individual needs for the sake of the whole, and we are going to collectively commit to a shared positive future. But in reality, social life looks much more like this, where there are many different wholes that are overlapping, that are interacting. My family, my organization, my community, my country, my music school, whatever it might be. And each of these different wholes have different interests. And so we are in a social space where there are a huge amount of diverse needs and interests at play. And we need to be able to acknowledge those if we're going to work effectively for change and invite that in. So it looks much less like this, where you set a shared future that you then walk towards all together, and much more like this, like we're in the same boat, we're bringing different talents, we have different fears, different skills that we bring to this, and there are waves and winds and rocks that come on our way that are not always predictable, and we're going to have to apply our talents to move forward more or less in the same direction. So this is part of what we work with in Reos is around how do we make more explicit who the we's are that are involved in a transformative process, and how do we build the capacity and the capabilities to collaborate in the process of working towards change, which is a rocky road. And what that requires of us is embracing conflict and connection. So being able to both work with disagreement and tension, and interacting with people who don't share our values, but also with connection and empathy, experimenting our way forward, learning from mistakes and taking the next step, and then stepping into the game, which in our work means that we take responsibility for our role, not only in the solution, but also in the problem. And that we, as much as possible, think about what is it that I'm doing to either reinforce the problems or to shift the reality, and to take a step back from finger pointing or blaming the powers that be for the situations that we're in. So based on all of this, I was thinking, what question do I ask? And I think it's more something along these lines of what future reality do we want to stop, start, or continue co-creating in Bilbao and for Bilbao and the world, and in acknowledgement that we are already co-creating the future. Do we want to continue co-create it in the direction that we are, or do we want to stop something we're doing in something in the way we're co-creating the future, or start something that we haven't yet begun? In Bilbao and for Bilbao and the world, in the sense that Igor was just talking about with the translocal and acting in your sphere of influence, but with that awareness of your interconnectedness with others. Okay, that's what I wanted to share for now. I have no idea whether that's whether that's helpful for you and how it lands in your other conversations, because I simply haven't spoken to you. But I hope that that there's something worthwhile in what I shared.